I always felt like there was something different about me, a darkness that lurked within, waiting to be unleashed. But I never imagined that it would consume me completely. It started with strange dreams, nightmares that were so vivid they felt like they were real. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, with the images of the horrors I had seen still fresh in my mind. But as time went on, the dreams became more and more intense. It wasn't just the dreams either. I started to see things that weren't there. Shadows that would flit across my peripheral vision, always just out of reach. And then, the whispers started. I could hear them even while I was awake, soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, speaking of things I couldn't understand. At first, I tried to ignore it all, thinking that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more insistent the whispers became. They started to take over my thoughts until I could think of nothing else. And then, one day, I snapped. I was at work, trying to focus on a task, when suddenly the whispers became so loud that I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. They were inside my head, and I couldn't escape them. That's when I saw it. The darkness. A massive shadow that seemed to fill the entire room. It was like a void, an emptiness that consumed everything in its path. And then, the whispers grew louder, and I heard them speak my name. "Come to us," they whispered. "Join us in the darkness." I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, surrounded by shattered glass and overturned furniture. My coworkers were staring at me in fear, and I could hear the sirens of the police in the distance. I was taken to a mental hospital where I was diagnosed with a severe form of psychosis. But I knew that it was more than that. The darkness was inside me, and it was taking over. The doctors tried everything they could, but nothing seemed to work. The darkness was too strong, and it was slowly consuming me. I was losing myself to it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And then, one day, it happened. The darkness consumed me completely. I was no longer in control of my own mind, and the whispers became my thoughts. They told me to do things that I never would have done before. I was no longer myself. I was the darkness. I was locked away in a padded cell, where I remained for what felt like an eternity. I was lost in the void, consumed by the shadows that filled my mind. I was no longer human. I was a monster. And then, one day, I woke up. I was back in my own mind, and the whispers were gone. But the darkness remained, a constant presence that reminded me of what I had become. I was no longer the person I once was. I was the darkness within. I had always been fascinated by the abandoned manor on the outskirts of town. It was a massive, decrepit old house that had been left to rot for as long as anyone could remember. No one had lived there in decades, and the place was rumored to be cursed. But I was never one to believe in curses. I was a brave young man, determined to uncover the truth about the abandoned manor. So, one day, I decided to explore it for myself. I stepped inside the manor and was immediately struck by the musty, stale air that hung within. Cobwebs covered the walls, and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. But as I ventured further into the house, I began to sense that there was something more to this place. Something that was not right. I heard footsteps coming from the second floor, and I started to feel a sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I continued to follow the sound. When I reached the top of the stairs, I was confronted by a dark figure that seemed to be staring directly at me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but the figure simply turned and disappeared into the shadows. I was shaking, but I knew that I had to find out what was going on. So I followed the figure, moving deeper into the manor. The further I went, the more I realized that this place was not what it appeared to be. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and the whispers of ghosts filled my mind. I felt like I was being watched, and I could sense a malevolent presence lurking in the darkness. And then, I heard it. The laughter. The sound of a child, giggling in the shadows. I felt a cold hand grab my arm, and I was pulled into the darkness. When I awoke, I was in a different part of the manor. It was a large room, with a fireplace and a single chair in the center. And sitting in that chair was the figure I had seen before. It was a woman, dressed in a long, flowing gown. Her hair was jet black, and her eyes were a deep, bottomless pit of darkness. And when she spoke, her voice was like ice. "Welcome, my child," she said. "You have been brought here for a reason." I was frozen in terror, unable to move or speak. The woman continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "You have been chosen to bear witness to the curse of this manor. A curse that has claimed the lives of countless others before you. A curse that can never be broken." And then, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the room. I was trapped, unable to escape the manor and its curse. And as I sat there in the dark, I knew that I would never be able to leave. I was cursed to spend the rest of my life in the abandoned manor, a prisoner to the darkness that had claimed my soul. I was always a brave person, or at least I thought so, until the night I encountered the shadow. It all started when I decided to take a walk at night to clear my mind. The moon was full, and the stars were shining bright, creating an eerie yet beautiful atmosphere. As I walked, I felt like I was being watched, and a chill ran down my spine. I brushed it off and continued walking, but the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, I saw a figure in the distance, standing still and watching me. At first, I thought it was just a tree, but as I got closer, I realized it was a shadow that seemed to have a life of its own. I stopped in my tracks, frozen with fear as the shadow started moving towards me. It was tall, with long, slender arms and a distorted body that seemed to shift and change with every step it took. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The shadow was getting closer, and I could hear a low growling sound coming from it. I felt its cold, clammy hand wrap around my arm, and I screamed in terror. That's when I woke up, drenched in sweat, in my own bed. I thought it was just a nightmare, but it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the shadow was more sinister and the grip on my arm was tighter. I was afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone, and afraid to face the shadow. One night, I gathered the courage to face the shadow and demand to know what it wanted from me. I closed my eyes and summoned all the strength I could muster, and when I opened my eyes again, the shadow was standing in front of me. Its eyes were empty, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. It spoke to me in a voice that was both menacing and haunting. "I am the shadow of your fears, the manifestation of everything you dread. I will never leave you, for I am a part of you." I woke up in a cold sweat, realizing that the shadow was not a nightmare, but a manifestation of my own fears and anxieties. From that day on, I made a vow to face my fears and overcome them, for the shadow would only have power over me as long as I allowed it to.